virtual, right? Okay. I won't believe it.
Good morning. Let me turn Vibe down here a little bit, or just stand away from it a little bit. A few folks have been to wander up here and take a seat, but we'll probably have a few folks still wander in Monday morning, early morning traffic coming to campus, military all back at work. It's definitely a little more crowded around here. Well, I'm Carol Ann Logue with UCF. I think I know pretty much everybody here. I had a chance to meet Caddy this morning. I have the wonderful privilege of co-chairing the UCF Innovate Ambassador Committee with Carolina Cruz-Nora, which I think many of you know. This event today is part of a series of events that we are doing and inviting our colleagues from across the university as well as from across the community to come listen, learn, network, connect, and help us improve how UCF moves innovation from the laboratories, the extraordinary world-class research that we do at UCF, to the marketplace. If you haven't seen the UCF mission statement recently, I wanted to be sure I gave you a chance to see it today, because what we are doing under this National Science Foundation ART program absolutely is a core part of what UCF's mission statement is. Propelling prosperity, enriching the human experience by making sure that that incredible research that we do gets out into the marketplace, into commercial entities, into nonprofits even, wherever it makes sense for that innovation to be used to change lives. And Dr. Cartwright, President Cartwright, as many of you know, is a huge proponent of this kind of effort to make sure that UCF is absolutely making a difference, not only in the lives of every individual that works for UCF, every student that attends UCF, but in the lives of our community, our state, our nation, and even internationally. We are incredibly privileged this morning to have Dr. Rosden with us, who is going to share his story, very successful, multifaceted story of not only being an academic, scientist, researcher, entrepreneur, corporate CEO, mentor, advisor, coach. I don't know how many roles this man has played and continues to play, but he's going to share with us this morning his story, his insights of what it's like to be an academic and embark on this arduous journey full of unexpected twists and turns. Dr. Rosden, if you would like to come up, I'm going to bring your presentation up, and while I do that, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Morning. Hi. Morning. Is it on? It's okay? All right. Hey, I'm very glad to be here. I'll go through my presentation and do a brief introduction. I think all those roles happen because if you kind of live long enough, you should, I guess, get into all those roles. Thank you. So I'm gonna just give a little background on me. So I my training has been in computer engineering, computer science, these sorts of things, and these are the sort of things that I've done over my career. So I used to design chips. These are microprocessors that I designed at Digital Equipment Corporation, Alpha Microprocessors. That group was eventually acquired by Intel. And then I was doing EDA. I did this design, electronic design automation. So I ran, about a $500 million business for a public company called Cadence Design Systems. And then I tried to retire in Florida, got bored, And I did a number of startups. I'm going to talk about that one in more detail because it's sort of it was done about a decade ago, so you have the full story, right? You have the beginning and the post-mortem, everything. And then since then, I've been running this research institute. I just call it a research institute because I do a lot of sort of random things. And if you go to people and say, I do a lot of random things, that doesn't sound as good as, you know, I run a research institute. And then, by the way, that includes education. That's a sort of a TED talk I gave in the area of education. All right, so I'm going to give you the story of this company called WiPower. And I'll give you the summary, and then we'll go through the details. The details are fun because, you know, like any story, it has an interesting beginning, it has plot twists, it has, you know, things that happen, and I think actually most of the fun of it is the actual plot twists. Right? So Florida technology startup out of UF. It had a nice exit with Qualcomm. Excuse me, 8-digit deal. Lots of drama along the way. You can't, if you don't, it's all startups have drama. And then I'm going to end with some, I guess, lessons, at least from my perspective, for entrepreneurs in Florida, and also for people that are trying to drive economic development in Florida. Okay. All right, so if you have any, you know, story, you have a plot, you need characters, right? So these are the big characters that were in this story. So this company was started actually before I got involved with them. Ryan, Ashish, and Hanak, they're all undergraduates from UF. And all super bright people, as you'll see. You know, you can see they eventually went to MIT. I think Hanak went to Harvard. They decided to, interestingly, they decided to stay and go to school in UF because it was inexpensive, you know. And as you will see, Ryan's dad actually seeded his company. The initial capital, about $300,000, was actually from the college fund that he had for Ryan. He could have easily gone to MIT, I think, originally. Professor Jensen Lin, he was the professor that worked in this area of wireless power. And then Zen Lo, he was the grad student that was working on it. So these guys were undergrads, grad student, so he was the professor. Now, it'll be interesting because he becomes part of the plot eventually down the line, right? So these are the characters, major characters in this space. And when I joined, you know, this was basically after Cadence. I had just moved down to Ocala because why Ocala? There's only one reason. My wife rides horses. So, you know, I had this kind of notion of retiring, and you know, like a lot of things that happen when you retire relatively young. I don't know. I was about 40 something. You get bored, you know. It's like, what do? You can't just sit around all day. So my thought was, I'll go up to UF and teach. You know, I had a PhD, so let me go up and teach. There's a guy named Mark Blau. He used to run the electrical engineering department at UF. He said, yeah, you can teach. As an aside, in terms of things not to do, don't go up to a university and say, I'm bored, I don't really want to work full time, I don't care about tenure, can I work with you? They don't quite know what to do with you. You know, so.
We do.
So anyway, I taught some classes there, but what they said was, listen, we've got like $1 billion of research expenditures every year. We've got all these students, but we don't have, we're not Silicon Valley, right? We're not growing. So we need business people, and they started introducing me to all various companies that had spun out, and this was one of them. And so when I joined, you know, UF spin out, at this point, let me give you a little bit more of the story. The research was done at UF. Ryan wanted to start a company, and he had the seed capital from his dad, and he had gone, so he got into MIT Sloan. So he made his project at MIT Sloan the formation of the business plan for WiPower, right? So he's up at, you know, Boston, MIT, funding some of the work that's happening through this formation of a company, right? When I joined, the seed funding was there, but of course they were rapidly burning through it. You know, doesn't take that much to burn through 300K. They had a license from UF, and by the way, it was like 35 pages. And it was the most interesting legal document you would read because it was a basic region document, and then it had like, you could tell, it was like a bad thing had happened. They said, we don't want that to ever happen again. So they put that in, and they put that in. And a lot of the stuff had to do with how these startups could use UF branding or the Gatorade branding and things like that, right? And it was a fairly one-sided, basically it was an agreement like, we don't like you, we can pull the license. You know, it was that sort of agreement. And it later caused a lot of issues for us. One of the pieces of advice I would give is, for the people that are doing this, the universities that are doing this, having this being a simple three-pager is really important. Now, by the way, later I dealt with MIT on a different company, different context. Three-pager. It's not very complicated. Very simple, right? So maybe something to learn. So we stayed at GTech. If you guys know, up at UF, there are many incubators. In those days, GTech was, I think, connected with the city, a little bit outside the city, and that was an incubation space. It was a fine space. The capital structure was a Florida corporation. Now, this is, by the way, one of the lessons. We did a Florida corporation. It may not have been the wisest thing to do, and I'll explain why. But pretty typical. You know, it was like, you're not going to spend a lot of money on this, and sometimes that can get you into trouble. So from a G&A point of view, we had a part-time corporate lawyer. Interestingly, the corporate lawyer was up in Boston. This is an important piece of data. The corporation is down in Florida. The corporate lawyer is up in Boston, right? And the reason for this was because Ryan, through Sloan, that was his network there, right? So, and then at Sloan, they also teach them how do you get press for your stuff. It turns out the way you get press for this stuff is you just send a lot of emails, you know? But they were pretty successful. They were able to get on, you know, CNBC, the Today Show, all of this stuff at a basic technology level, right? The board was Ryan, his dad, who gave the money, and then later I joined as the CEO, right? Okay. And I would say the status was they had some technical progress, right? Very limited business progress. They talked to a lot of people, but they didn't really have a way to talk to people, as in, well, this is what I do, this is what the product is, and things like that. And then they had some awareness, right? So that was kind of the status as I sort of joined the company and took over as CEO. Let me explain the technology a little bit. There won't be a test on this, okay? But I want to give you the basic points because I want you to understand, typically you start with something like this, and then you like getting from that technology idea to a product and after a business, I want to give you a sense of what it takes, the kind of thinking that it takes. So basically you've got two things going on. You've got a transmitter, some coil, think of it as some coil as some electronics, that's beaming energy, and then there's a receiver that sort of interlocks with this transmitter and receives the energy and then gives it to whatever device needs it, like a phone or whatever else, right? So that's the basic technology. This is as old as Tesla, literally. So the question is, you know, how do you, like, if you're working on something like this, and this is your core technology, obviously, you have to build something that's interesting and differentiating, okay? And the kind of problems you have to deal with, I'm going to now shift from how do you go from a technology. So the technology and the science was the transmission of power with coils. But to actually build a product, you need to deal with the following issues. Well, it needs to be not very heavy. If you do this in a basic form, I don't know if you guys remember the old shavers that used to have wireless power, and then like the receiving unit was this lead cast iron thing, but really heavy, right? Obviously, you can't do that with like a phone. So in order to fix that problem, what you do is you increase frequency, but if you increase frequency, the components can become smaller, but it's a lot more complicated. right? So the core technology obviously did that. We raised frequency. We controlled the behavior so that the power and the field was more or less uniform. You have to deal with the following issues. Okay, you want to put power into a coil, but what if there's something else out there, like a coin or like a necklace? You don't want to heat that up. You don't want to transmit energy to that. So how do you tell the difference between the good thing you want to transmit energy to the parasitic thing, right? So you have to have all this kind of complexity, either detecting that of communication systems and so on. So a lot of our technology was really going beyond, how do I go back?
The smaller little arrow on the remote goes back.
Oh, okay, sorry, there you go. Yeah, so a lot of the technology beyond this basic thing was really all of this stuff, you know? And this was a lot of work, and it was a lot of productization, right? So at the end of all of this, you know, you have a technology, you've now built a kind of a productization layer, and then you have the question you have to ask is, what's your core differentiation relative to your competitive alternatives, right? And our competitive alternatives are very interesting. You know, there was this company called Convenient Power. They were kind of similar, but more expensive than us. This was a really interesting company, Whitetricity. This is an MIT spinout. So far, I know our capitalization was like 500K or something. Their capitalization was like 20 million, right? And they, and the people supporting them were like one of the funders was the CEO of Analog Devices, right? MIT spinouts already had that, right? So we were really kind of scared of them, you know. Wild Charge, this was a kind of a really interesting company. We sent power wirelessly. They did it really simply. They basically had a pad with strips of metal, and then if it was a phone, the phone had like dimples. And the wireless connection was, you would just put it down and you had enough connections. But, you know, they made it fly. In fact, you know, Duracell actually did a deal with them, and then a number of others, right? And so we had to look at this space and figure out, well, how are we better and how are we different? And it turned out the way we were better and different was that on top of the charger, we could put a uniform field which could charge multiple devices with pretty good efficiency. And so that was the key thing that we basically had as a differentiator. I mean, just to give you a kind of a story, as you can imagine, as a CEO, I visited all these people. When I visited Whitetricity, you know, they had a massive office outside of MIT, and I walked into the meeting kind of really concerned, right? I walked out like, okay, we're going to be okay. And the reason for this was, it was very obvious to me, they were scientists, but they weren't engineers. And let me tell you the difference. So they would go around telling people, oh, well, we can transmit all this power at you know, incredibly high efficiency, right? But what they didn't understand is, you know, natural components have natural variation. And you have to account for that natural variation to understand what you can reliably deliver versus what you can deliver as a one-off science experiment. And it was really kind of funny to just see that difference very obviously, where they could, you know, they were great at the press releases, but actually delivering the product, just a little bit of variation on the core components. I'm talking about like the semiconductors, and you would really fall off on the efficiency curve. And we actually designed in a way that it was much more stable. So these are the things you sort of learn, I guess. Now, when you have a technology like that, you kind of have, as a business, matter of business, you have a lot of questions, right? So the first question you have is, well, what is my business? Am I selling the IP? Is that my base? If I'm selling the IP, how much should I how much should I build of a product to demonstrate the value of that IP, right? So that's kind of the first question. Am I selling a technology? Let me differentiate the two. IP is I give patents, I give know-how. Technology is maybe I give software, design systems, things like that. And then, or am I going to build a final product and sell that, okay? And it's not at all clear, obviously, which one of those paths you take, but what is clear is the costs are completely different and the barriers are very different, because here, on the IP side, and to some degree on the technology side, your customers are going to be other people that build final products. On the product side, you have to kind of figure out, well, how do I go to market? How do I deal with retailers? You know, one of the really interesting things I learned, I don't know if I'll talk about this, is, so I started working with Best Buy and then with Apple stores. Right? And what I realized is Best Buy has just too many stores. I can't support their inventory. Apple has much smaller stores and they charge a lot. They were a lot more attractive as a customer for me because I could support, you know, the smaller number of Apple stores from a capital point of view, and they could charge more, and then they had, of course, you had the brand advantage, right? Even though the volume was way bigger at Best Buy, but when you're ramping up, like the float of the capital is a huge issue, right? The second thing is we have a technology that's connecting two things. So the question is, are there standards for this, right? You know, nobody wants to just build one-offs with your technology. And our competitors were working on standardizing some aspects of what they were doing. So that kind of left you with a funny situation. Should I engage with those standardization bodies? Should I try to build my own standard, right? So all of these were sort of challenging issues we had to deal with. And remember, the whole team is maybe, I don't know, 9 people. Okay, so, and then finally, vertical markets. This is a horizontal technology. So it can, you know, we can wirelessly charge, you know, this, we can wirelessly charge this, we can wirelessly charge the lights, you know, so you can use it for anything. So the question becomes, but how do you focus and kind of succeed at something before you try to go wider? So are there vertical markets that are interesting? And all of these, by the way, I dealt with, you know, consumer, obviously, you know, with laptops and cell phones and other such devices. Automotive, I mean, I have some war stories there. Dealt with all the folks that are, you know, the like in Detroit, that area, GM, Ford, and their supply chain, the tiered supply chain. Defense, we had a lot of interest from the defense industry. Furniture, I mean, I'll get into some of this in a little more detail. Okay, here we go, okay. So at some point, we were dealing with all these people, right? So we had semiconductor players like Qualcomm and TI that were building chips, and they wanted to provide wireless power enabled chips and systems to their customers, right? So we're kind of, so they're kind of distributors, competitors, you know, at the same time, right? I went up to, by the way, if you want to travel a lot, this is the way to do it. So I went up to, I guess it's Western Michigan, Grand Rapids, that area. That turns out to be the center of the office furniture industry in the US, right? So we were talking to Steelcase, a company called Gill, where the idea was for office furniture, you would have built-in transmitters, okay? And so when you had meeting rooms, as an example, you could just put your laptop down and it would charge. And they were looking at that from a point of view of differentiation. High-end homes. So for whatever reason, the Edmonton area, they had all these high-end home builders that were very interested in like your kitchen appliances and everything else not having cords anywhere. You know, just you had wireless basins and then you could charge. Right? Event manager, this was an odd one. So I guess event managers go into a space, and obviously if you need power, the event owners, or I'll say the people that provide the space, don't want you to drill holes through and mess up their space. So they were looking for a solution. Can I go on one side of the wall and then put something on the other side of the wall so that I can transmit power without actually changing physically the structure? So laptop makers, Dell, I have a good Dell story. So of course, how do you deal with these guys? You have to try to figure out, in any sales, business development situation, typically the mantra is go as high as you can, and then figure out how to go down, right? So I'm struggling, I'm trying to, how do I break into these big companies? And I noticed that all the Dell contacts that I have, first name, last name, So I literally, this is what I did. I said, michael.dell@dell.com, and I just sent an email out, right? Like 5 seconds later, I get a response. Just like the probability of this is very low. And he says, oh, this looks very interesting. Can you send me a design kit? Of course, we FedExed over a design kit, and then he sent it down to the bowels of Dell. And well, really, we were bought before anything happened, but then I thought, hey, this worked. Steve.jobs. That didn't work. But my point is, you never know. You just try it, It's like, okay. Auto companies, okay, yeah, this is a good story. So I worked with Ford. Ford was very, very, so the auto companies were very funny to deal with because they had this tiered structure of suppliers. So the OEM would be the one that sort of decided everything, but they would sort of say, yeah, you're just too little for us to deal with, work with X, Y, and Z supplier down the road. And by the way, give me all your manufacturing costs right now, because they're just trying to cost squeeze everything, right? So we were warned, don't tell them that. And then I have a friend who invented something called HomeLink. You might be familiar with it. It's the garage door opener capability that cars have. And what he did was, he went to all the garage door people and got exclusive deals for communications first. And then he went to the automakers, okay? And then therefore, instead of getting a cost plus contract, he was actually able to have a contract with some money to it. So that was kind of an interesting thing. And then General Motors was really interesting. The General Motors people told me, we don't sign NDAs. I'm like, what do you mean you don't sign? I'm like, I don't know if you know in this industry, in a high-tech industry, I mean, we sneeze and say sign an NDA. It's like NDAs are signed, and they're pretty standard, all that stuff, but they're like, we don't sign NDAs. It's corporate policy. We don't sign NDAs. So I'm trying to figure out, I was like, I guess we're not going to work with you. They were like, we're General Motors. What do you mean you're not going to work with us, right? But they were sufficiently interested, and this just tells you, by the way, you get an insight into how, what's the word, like a bureaucratic an organization is. So they really wanted to work with us. So literally, they hired a third party for like $500K that their only job was to deal with us. They would sign the NDA with us, and then the final results were sent to General Motors, right? The only reason for the existence of this third entity was they don't sign NDAs. So, retailers, Best Buy, Radio Shack, we dealt with that. Just to give you a sense of why we were playing with them. Most of the retailers have private label products that they sell, right? So what we told them and what they started to buy into was, what if all your private label products had this wireless charging capability? And since you sell them across the board, you actually get an advantage versus, just I'm selling a knockoff from what HP is selling or something like that. Right? So, and then obviously the cell phone makers, it's very hard to break into the cell phone directly. So the accessories makers, the jackets and so on. And this is just like a small sampling. And what tends to happen is, you try everything. You just sort of like, you know, you kind of come up with an approach, you go try it, and then sometimes it has resonance, and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes they say, well, okay, I'll come back later, and so on. But so we dealt with a lot of people. Now, funnily enough, most of these people I still have relationships with because you tend to build relationships over this period of time. All right, so I want to give you a sense of that IP product. Like for any one of those, the kind of investment that's required, right? So you would think the simplest one is this skin design for a carrier, cell phone carrier. So what we had to do was we had to first design how do you get our coil into that carrier, right? So that's this mechanical design that has to be done. Okay, then this has to worry about, you know, what largely is a plastic thing. Putting all, you don't have to worry about the details. The point I'm trying to get across here is the complexity of all of this stuff is non-trivial, right? So you have to break down that. Depending on what's happening, the weight matters, obviously the cost matters, and one of the bigger things that matters is this thing heats up, okay? And what happens is in cell phones, when they heat up, they shut off. Yeah. And so we had to worry about the thermal characteristics. And my point of these 3 slides was just, that's like this one little, you know, delve into the space of taking a technology and building something that's a bit more complete on the product side. I haven't even gotten into how do you do this with scale manufacturing, right? Things like that. Okay. Let's talk about operations and money. So this is kind of, I would say, at least even today, kind of the traditional path that people sort of look at from a raising money point of view. You know, kind of technical, angels, beta customers. I mean, it looks really great, right? Almost never does it work this way. And so what we ended up doing was, well, at the end of it, we had raised, I mean, it's just an incredibly small amount, like 700K, right? And so the question is, how did we do this? And we played a lot of tricks, and these tricks are kind of useful, right? So the first trick is we had a highly leveraged employee model. What I mean by that is we pretty much told everybody, we don't got any money. So what if we pay you with equity, more or less, and if you really need to take money, just a very minimal amount, right? So we had a highly leveraged employee model. Obviously, a lot of the money was raised from angels and family and suppliers and customers. Now, I'll explain the be careful. This will get into now in the drama of the deal cycle. The people that you think are your friends, or let me put it this way, you don't really know who's your friend until there's a pot of money in front of them and they have to make a moral decision. And it's just, and we sort of saw that, right? We had a lot of, every governmental source that we could try to get money from, we did. So we got matching grants from the Florida High Tech Council, thank you. This SBIR NSF grant was really sort of timely. I think we were probably a few weeks away from running out of money, right, when that came in. And then we developed some hacks. And any kind of business, you kind of develop hacks. So the first hack we built in, which is a sort of a standard one, is payment terms. So Gill is a supplier up in the Rapids area, Grand Rapids area, furniture supplier, and they wanted to build a series of products. And we said, listen, we can't support you because we don't have the money. So why don't you prepay us some amount of that money, and then we'll deliver the product, but it's essentially prepayment up front, right? And so we use that kind of technique in various situations from a cash flow management point of view, right? Another hack, and this I think actually worked out really quite well. Of that 700K, at least 300, maybe 200K was from this. What would happen to us is people would really like our technology, and then everybody in the world would want to test it. You know, I've got this application, and you saw the list of, I mean, that was a small list of potential applications. I mean, I mean, I don't want to get into we had marketing people that wanted to build like very interesting marketing things, and so immense amount of interest, but we have a small team. And so what we did was we said, okay, let's build a design kit, charge $5K, and that's the design kit's got the basic hardware you need, and then some amount of consulting services, but we're not going to deal with you until you buy the design kit. Simple as that. And our thinking was very simple. If you're serious, you've got an engineer looking at this, you're probably paying the engineer $150K, $120K, whatever it is. It's much bigger. So if the $5K is really getting in your way, you're not serious, right? And so that ended up being quite effective, both from the point of view of filtering out the tire kickers, as they say, right? And then also bringing, you might think $5K, nothing. No, that added up to significant money for us, right? So we kind of developed various hacks along the way to sort of bring some cash in and also manage our business, right? All right. So in terms of the rest of the business, there's a very basic question. When you're in the beginning of this cycle, you sort of have this problem of how do you attract good talent, and how do you attract and keep good talent, and just how do you run the business on the cash flow that you're there. So we, I was explaining before to somebody, UF, out of UF has some very talented engineers that graduate there, and they have a lot of options. And a lot of the options are, Texas, Silicon Valley, they are heavily recruited there. And so when we were trying to recruit against that, we sort of had this idea of, let's not, if the salary in Silicon Valley is 120K, we're not going to pay that, right? You'll be lucky to get 40 here. But let's look at time to first house. So we sort of sat there and said, okay, you go there and you want to buy a house. Check, 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 check. Okay, you want to buy a house around Gainesville or Ocala. Check, check. It turns out it's way shorter, used to be anyway, way shorter to time to first house here versus a place like Silicon Valley. So we sort of used that as a mechanism. And the other thing we sort of said, and I actually believe this, and this actually happened, we would draw a picture up, and I should have brought the normal talk I gave in this. Imagine kind of a bell curve, and then in the beginning, and the bell curve is meant to demonstrate your ability to take risk, right? So in the beginning of this point, the bell curve is very low, and as it were, your ability to take risk is very high. Why? Because your natural burn rate's very low, right? I mean, you're coming out of school. You don't have many, maybe you don't have a family and things like that, right? So your ability to take risk is pretty good there. And then as you start accumulating, obligations, as it were, it's very, very hard, right? You can't sit there and say, well, yeah, it's okay, you don't pay me this month, right? It's just not going to happen because you have kids, you have, and then on the back half, interestingly enough, it comes back down because maybe you're near retirement, and the next year's salary is not as material anymore, right? So we actually sort of built that picture, and we sort of said on the young end, we said, listen, by not doing a startup, you're actually you're losing the opportunity to take risk. This is literally the way we phrased it, and it's actually true, right? So so that's one. And the second thing is, even if we fail, okay, we don't think we're going to fail. Even if we fail, as it were, your balance sheet will be much better. And what I mean by that is, we haven't got 100 people. If you go into Intel, if you go into whatever the biggest company you are, well, the first thing you're going to do is not the interesting work, because the interesting work is really the veterans in the company are actually driving that. But if you come here, you're one of 5, one of 10, and you're going to actually do a lot more interesting work and learn much faster than in a bigger company. And both of these things, by the way, are very true. And I'll demonstrate that with what happened with the WiPower team. But that's what we used for attracting people, right? So the next thing is, and this is, I would say, on the bad side, we had this issue of the penny wise, pound foolish. We had a mass attorney running our corporate in Florida. I'll tell you what happened because of that. So manufacturing, we worked with a company that was based here in the US but could scale in China. That was kind of the model from an EMS point of view. And then you had to be super careful about ramping production because there was a lot of money involved relative to the capitalization of the company. On the standard side, you want to engage from a defensive point of view to prevent somebody from locking your technology out in the standard. And then from an offensive point of view, propose solutions that get kind of closer to it, right? Okay, so that's kind of how we ran it. And then kind of relative to, this is a paper I wrote. If people are interested, you can get the details of the paper. How to position what we were doing, so as it were a Florida high-tech startup. Here's what, and this is all also true, here are the advantages of doing that, right? So one of the first advantages is that you have disproportionate access to ideas. Kind of the way to look at it is, between the universities there's a huge amount of IP being generated. That's not getting picked over at nearly the same level as in Berkeley in California and Stanford. So if you're a business person, it's actually, you have disproportionate access to interesting ideas, right? You also have disproportionate access to talent, disproportionate access to local markets, right? You're outside the bubble, and then you can run this super lean startup model. So these are all kind of what I'll call, if you think of them the right way, the advantages, and all of them kind of lead to much lower levels of capitalization can lead to something interesting. Now, by the way, maybe other thing I would say is, the nature of raising money is, the higher the amount you have to raise, the more structured investment you need. And so if you need to raise, I don't know, $50 million, it's very hard to do that with angels, right? It's just not going to happen. You have to go to traditional structured investment. But if you have to raise 500,000, that's 10 people, 50K, 20 people, 25K. That's quite doable, right? Not easy, but it's quite doable. So I'll explain this more later, but the amount of capital, if you can keep that very low, and you can keep that very low by having a burn rate that's very low, that turns out to be a very powerful combination. Okay. All right, so we're plugging along, and if you guys remember, we had the 2008 financial crisis, right? And not that we were particularly successful in getting VC money, because we would go to VCs, and literally this is what would happen in those days anyway. And we had a lot of contacts in Silicon Valley and in the Boston area. And that sounds interesting. Are you guys willing to move here? Like, they would not even consider us unless we were local. Because the headset in those days, and maybe still, was that I need to keep an eye on you guys, you need to be local, right? So that was an issue. By the way, and at the same time, I was working at the state of Florida, and you may or may not be aware of this, but the state of Florida has a large pension fund. Many of you may be part of it. In that pension fund, we have what are called, it's invested, actually used to be in Pennsylvania. It's invested up in Pennsylvania, and it has, stocks, bonds, all that sort of stuff, but it has a small sliver that is private equity and then VC. So we actually fund Silicon Valley startups, because the money goes there and then goes over there, right? The LPs are there, which, for us at least as a startup here, we're like, well, why not just keep it here, right? Now the interesting thing that happened was that, the VC money all died, of course, right? That's not right. and because, this is the positive side of not raising so much money, our burn rate was tiny, so it didn't really affect us much, right? Because we were not just, we were just, it's sort of like we were so poor, it didn't matter. But interestingly, most of our competitors were highly affected. So most of them, I think 4 or 5 of them actually went out of business because their burn rates were so high. And so it, in a funny way, it affected us positively because it took competitors out. Right? All right, so then the big event, or the big breakout that we had was the 2009 CES, okay? And we were kind of, with all these engagements with business development and things like that, we were kind of gearing up, right? And then at CES, I had set up like almost 40 meetings in our booth. And maybe I'll explain a couple of things. So we're trying to demonstrate a differentiated value, right? If we had just another wireless power solution with the normal products, it wouldn't be so interesting. So we came up with this idea. Actually, my first idea was an air hockey table, right? So you have an air hockey table with the puck having something that was lit, and it would, while it was moving, that was to demonstrate wireless power and movement and multiple devices and all that sort of stuff, right? That was the idea. Well, it turned out the weight of the thing was such that the air hockey thing didn't quite work, so we came up with this. These are pool lights, and this is water, and it was falling along. Let me see if is this going to play? Oh no!
Yeah.
How do I just go over and play?
Yes. Just click on the link.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Hi, my name is Ryan Sang. I'm president of WiPower. What we're demonstrating here is our latest wireless power demo. We've got one transmitter underneath this table. It's providing power to 20 different devices at the same time. Each one of these records about the same amount of power as a handset, and it's received power by a magnetic field. As I lift it up, it turns off, and as I push it back in the water, it turns on. We launched products and launched this year. Charging pads that support about 5 devices at the same time. And visit our website, www.wipower.
All right. So now, I don't know if, whenever you go to a conference, you never know how people will be interested. I can just tell you that whatever you saw there was the minimal version of how many people were in our booth. We were, like the 40 meetings I had, I was thinking I would get a couple of chairs. There was no room, right? It was so crowded, and a huge amount of interest. I should mention a couple of other things. I mean, the whole thing, travel, blah, 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 I think we spent like 40K, right? We found out later that next to us, Samsung, their mini iteration of, because they wanted to add it, they incrementally spent 500K. Right? So you just sort of, this massive difference in what was left. But anyway, this was a huge monumental event for us. And the result of this, let me I'll just go this way. No? Advance, yeah. Okay, there we go. The result of this is we had 3 bidders that wanted to buy the company. Okay? Now, as you can tell, let me describe the bidders, right? So we had Duracell, by the way, based in Connecticut, which I got to find out intimately, with all the flights up there. And their headset was, we're in the primary battery business. It's kind of a slow growth business, not much margin. We can't get into the recharging business because that's sold through, rechargeable batteries are generally sold through the handset and the supplier. So there's not enough margin for us. So let's try to grow on the charging side and have wireless charging infrastructure. So that was their headset. A guy named Mark Bertolami, I got to know him quite well. He was the president of Duracell at the time, and they were part of Procter & Gamble at the time. They no longer are, right? So they were interested in buying us. Qualcomm, and what I forgot to mention was the graduate student that was the initial character, he had a sort of a fight with the other parts of the team, and he joined Qualcomm. Okay, and he was trying to build essentially a competitive product there, and they had a competitive team inside of Qualcomm, which wasn't working so well. So then the Qualcomm business management sort of approached us, and then we had Radio Shack, and they're based in Fort Worth. And it was really funny. I would visit their headquarters, and it turns out their headquarters shares buildings with a university. I forgot what it is, Texas Christian maybe. And every time I would visit, more of the campus was the university, and less of the campus was Radio Shack. So you kind of really got a sense of, oh, the trajectory is not the, a very good trajectory. And their value statement, as I said, was this thing where we have private label parts. So if we have private label parts, let's have a unifying thing that puts them together. Now, if you look at this is not so great for us because they don't compete with each other. What you really want is, if somebody wants to buy, you want two semiconductor companies, oh no, the other guy will get it. No. And so when they found out, like when Qualcomm found out that Procter & Gamble was interested, they were like, great! First customer, and then Procter & Gamble was like, Qualcomm's interested. Oh, that's great. We'll have a solid partner that knows what to do. So anyway, so we kind of ran into these kinds of sort of interesting dynamics, even though we try to spruce up the competitive juices, right? So that led about, I don't know, 7 months later. Oh, I didn't bring it. Shit. Oh, yeah. 7 months later, there was something. I had the deal book. I kid you not. I was telling these guys the deal book is about this thick, okay, and it's outrageous to look at in terms of how big it is, right? Anyway, so Qualcomm. So we had this managed competition problem. We had an internal team that was fighting against the acquisition. We can do it, right? And the business team was more or less like, yeah, you've been telling me that for a while. It hasn't happened. These guys seem to be ahead. Anyway, we buy them, we get a competitor out. That was the kind of thinking that was going on there. So there was all this internal fighting. And what we didn't know is, like, when we visited them, we had an NDA. but like from afar, they were checking out what we were doing, right? The competitive team, right? Okay. But anyway, they said, okay, we want to go forward, and they built a term sheet, and then they sent it over to us. Now you might think, great, got a term sheet. And our lawyer in Massachusetts said, I can't handle this. I'm a little firm. You're going to have to find a big firm to deal with all the due diligence issues that Qualcomm's going to want to go through. And I can't handle this. So I approached some big firms, and they said, great. It's going to be $400K, okay? And can we have half of it, my total, capitalization is $700K. If this deal goes south, I don't want to go out of business, right? So one of the first things that I did was, and this is, just desperation, I just called a whole bunch of firms and I said, here's my term sheet. If it goes south, I'm going to pay you $50K. If it goes north, I'll pay you 3x whatever the cost is. Okay? Who's going to take this? And all the firms in Florida that are the big firms. And now, by the way, we had, for reasons I'll explain, we had to be in Florida firm. And many of them said no. Okay. But one of the big ones, which is HWH in Tampa. I forgot what I said. 3 names, right? A guy named Dave Bellman, he said, okay, got the term sheet. I see the term sheet, it's real, okay, and we'll go forward. And by the way, it turned out to be a hugely positive decision. Why? Because, most legal firms, you sort of say, could you check this out? And before you know it, there's like this bill, right? But because of this deal, they literally would ramp back and not do legal work until they were confident it was going to the next step. And they became this kind of like, okay, you know, when the Qualcomm team didn't respond appropriately, well, they haven't responded yet. We probably shouldn't do this until they respond, right? So they became highly aligned, at least it were, to my purposes, right? Okay. So the Qualcomm team, they come to GTEC. I don't know if you've ever been to GTEC. It's a moderate-sized building, and we had 2 rooms in it, nothing big. They come in with 3 cars full. We see the cars come in, and we're like, we don't even know where are we going to put these people? And it was their finance team, their legal team, you know, their IP team, regulatory, business units, corporate. I mean, it was like everybody and anybody, and they came in and on the due diligence process. Now, not surprisingly, the technology due diligence went pretty well. Right? I mean, that's kind of the core we have. But the corporate due diligence was a disaster, okay? And the reason was, we had a Florida corporation which run by a Massachusetts attorney who didn't know that in Florida you need unanimous consent on the board of directors to pass resolutions. So it's like none of our cap table is valid. Just imagine sort of, you know, it's like Qualcomm's like, what are we buying again? You know, what's the company, what's the entity, you know, this kind of thing. And so that was a huge issue. And so the way of course the solution was devised, and the solution was, we'll recreate the whole thing, but every single person has to sign off on it. Okay, now imagine this. Okay, every single person, now this is where morality comes in, right? Yeah, you need my signature, and do I try to take advantage of that? And some people did. You know, some people did. And so this is the other thing I say, beware of exes, right? Ex-wives, right? Now, I know it sounds funny, but if you're as an agent investor and they're married, the wife is your partner, whether you like it or not. Right? So ex-wives, ex-employees, obviously, you know, they can claim whatever they want, and also ex-investors, right? We also had other funny things. So basically, they built this, you know, new cap table and signatures for everybody, and we, you know, my job as a CEO was to get signatures, to people to sign off. This is what we was agreed to. Okay, just sign off on it. This kind of thing. And I would say 80–90% of the time was not an issue. Because, yeah, that's true, okay. But then, like I said, people that thought they were friends, that, well, I really think I should get double that. Literally like that, right? So we had a lot of situations, we sort of, and then by the way, inside the company, I was sort of like, I just thought it's a problem to be solved. Carlos, who was Ryan's father, had a very moralistic point of view. Like, that's not fair, you know? And like, it's not fair, but you know, that's the choice you have, right? You know, this kind of thing. So there was all these dynamics that were going on. And then we had the other funny dynamics, which is, you're trying to get people's signature, and one of the people that was a minor investor was Ryan's brother, who happened to be a Navy SEAL. And he was stationed on a submarine, okay? So we're like, we're trying to close this deal, and you know, the submarines, when they're below, they're not getting anything. They kind of, what I later learned is they surface, they get their emails, and then they can maybe do something, but it's, you know, so you have this kind of just funny, like we're telling Qualcomm, it's not that there's an issue, the guy is in a submarine, you know? So we kind of worked through that. He basically, I think he gave his dad the power of attorney on this front. We had similar issues. Somebody was on an Alaskan cruise, you know, hard to get to. So you just kind of, you know, you never think of this stuff, right? You know, people are living their lives and stuff is happening, right? So that was the first issue, corporate governance. And I guess my takeaway is penny wise, pound foolish can be very bad. So getting this right up front is kind of important. And then the UF IP deal turned out to be a huge issue. And the reason is, what we learned is that Qualcomm is a very interesting company. The way they sell is, if you buy a chip from Qualcomm, you actually don't have the rights to use it. You have to separately have an IP deal with them. This is a huge issue in the industry. Apple and Qualcomm have had knocked out, drag out fights, but this is a massive moneymaker for Qualcomm. So they don't, they're not going to deal with any technology unless they have full control of the IP in the way that they need it, right? And our UF deal was very one-sided, right? Okay. Now, one-sided, the oddest issues caused the biggest problems. So Qualcomm said, okay, upon dispute, the resolution all has to happen in California. And UF said, no way, has to be Florida. And I kid you not, there were weeks where you sure? Yeah, it could be California. I mean, it doesn't really make such a difference, this kind of thing. And there were all these legal issues. I would say some not ultimately not so important, but we had to restructure the UF deal, and I went through a lot of pain, I would say, with UF to do this, especially for things that I would say were not very material. Okay. So as this is happening, so we get these, we get this bad news. We're trying to work through all this stuff. An interesting thing happens. I call this the many-to-one effect. So Qualcomm is this massive team, as I said, 3 car forwards of people, and their counterparty on our side is me, just me. Now, obviously, there's the workload involved with that, but the other thing is, I know everything. So at some point, they reached like the Qualcomm team trusted me enough. Literally, the conversation would go like this. Oh yeah, Betsy from finance says that's not a problem. And the legal guys, okay. So you kind of get this, especially if you build trust, you get to a point where they're fractionally working on this. They're working on many other things, and you actually have a lot more knowledge than they do, even about what's going on in their company, right, on the deal. I mean, this is kind of a lot of the negotiation is about this upfront. It's an all-cash deal, but what they typically do is they sort of say, well, okay, we'll give you 50% up front, and if everything works out okay. What they mean by that is, okay, is nobody sues us and other legal stuff, we'll give you the other 50% 3 years later, right? And we would say, no, how about 90-10? We're very confident. They're like, well, I don't know, you got this governance issue, So you kind of have this negotiation on this escrow up front sort of thing. And then, obviously, with a technology deal, you have the key employee negotiations. The key technical employees have to be there, and they stay for a period of time to transfer the technology. And, I just have kind of a small funny story there. So our corporate attorney couldn't represent the employees because there's sort of this conflict of interest, right? So they got they were getting other counsel for them as individuals. And Ryan had a friend of his who was just out of law school, and he said, oh, I got a buddy that's going to do this, right? And so they send over the agreement, and the agreement says something to the effect of, you certify that you haven't done anything bad, you haven't I don't know, done fraud, or these kind of stipulations, right? Okay. And his friend says, don't sign that. Don't sign that. Right? Just giving him advice, and he's kind of confused. He's like, I don't know what to do. I don't want to hold up the deal. And then he finally got a more seasoned attorney, and the seasoned attorney told him, okay, if you were on the other side and somebody's fighting you on this topic, what do you think you think? Right? So anyway, we sort of resolved. So I mean, you kind of get into all of this stuff, and then this final thing is hilarious to me, which is, I'm so sorry I forgot the deal book, because it sort of shows the picture of how thick it is, right? Anyway, so the very final thing you do is, it was a what's it called, a reverse something merger, where they create a Florida corporation which actually buys our corporation, right? Okay, the final step is it's actually submitted to the state, all these documents, right? With a signature from their treasurer or CFO, and then my signature, right? The signature is a one-pager, right? So obviously a very important thing, right? Just to finish the whole thing. So they're going to FedEx it over to a local entity, and I said, okay, I'll FedEx over. And you know how in FedEx you can pay the extra rate for it's 10:30. So well, okay, I'll pay the extra rate, okay? So it's 10:30. His document shows up. My document is lost. Nobody knows where the heck it is, right? So anyway, I'm in Ocala. I'm like, okay. I just got in my car. I just drove to Tallahassee, right? And then had them print out another one and sign it. And, I mean, just the weirdest thing happens, right? I don't know what happened with that document, but all right. So that was the deal, and let me see. And so let's now get into the post deal. So there were a lot of surprises after the deal, right? Remember, we're this little company. That's Qualcomm, big public company, billions of dollars. So my thought was, man, they must have a huge channel. They're going to want to build their own trademark. None of this happened. So they took, and still, by the way, their trademark for wireless power is our trademark from WiPower. Okay, and I asked them, well, why? Don't you have like corporate attorneys? Corporate marketing people. So, well, actually, you're much more known in this space than we were. Okay, okay. So they kept the trademark. Our pipeline was actually bigger than their internal team's pipeline, which was kind of interesting, right? Our R&D, which was about 10 people, was bigger than Qualcomm's R&D team. Now, this is sort of interesting. I would ask them, well, how big is your team? 30 people, okay? Well, it turns out that's like 2 full-time people, and then, Fred over in corporate treasury works 1/10 of the, and you add it all up, it's like FTE is maybe 30 people, but people actually focused working on this product was like 4. I don't know, it wasn't very much, that was another interesting thing. And then, as I told you, when you're a startup, the people coming in, you're given large tasks that we have nobody else to handle. Like we had this guy, Ashish Gupta, I'll talk about him more. He graduated from UF, undergrad, and we said, you're in charge of manufacturing. What do you know about manufacturing? Nothing. Okay, go learn, right? Okay, so he does that. He does, in fact, did that quite well, and I'll tell you where that led. What was interesting is that when the people came over, they sort of had this formula. 2 years out of school, boom, goes here. That's the level that this person will go. Very soon after the acquisition, all of the WiPower people advanced extremely rapidly inside of Qualcomm, right? And I think the reason for that is this balance sheet thing that I was talking about, where you have to learn a lot, you see the whole business. It's a value statement that's very important, right? And then the big event that occurred was they integrated the WiPower technology into the Sandpiper platform. I don't know if you guys know what this is. This is like the equivalent of, Intel, for all their laptops, takes your technology and puts it in. So this is the core platform that Qualcomm uses for cell phones, right? So every single place that Qualcomm's chipset is used, the WiPower technology is available, and so like all Samsung phones have our technology because of that, right? And so this was from I guess, an impact to the world point of view, this is a huge, huge deal, right? So let's see. Okay, what happened to these guys afterwards? Now, as you can imagine, this transaction was life-changing for them, right? They've been out of school, more or less financially independent. Oh, okay, I guess I should mention the deal a little bit. Because we had raised so little money, obviously most of the capitalization was with employees and early investors. And the deal itself was an interestingly large deal. So effectively, everybody got a fair amount of money, right? And employees did. So Ryan, he of course went to Qualcomm because he had to go with the deal. And then, right after that 2 years or whatever it was, he left. And he started this company with a friend of his from MIT called Kitchen Safe, and that's actually Shark Tank. So you can, if you want to see him on Shark Tank, he went there. The product itself is not so interesting. What it is it's a plastic with a timer, and the idea is you put cookies in, and you say, I'm not going to eat that until 2 days later, and you put a timer and it locks you out. Okay. So that's the whole product, right? I think, who's the bald guy on Kevin? Yeah, Kevin basically looked at it and said, "This is a piece of shit." So, anyway, he did that for a while, and then he left, and then he and his brother, the submarine SEAL guy, founded a company called Shield AI, which is over there, and that's just got valued at about $5 billion. Yeah. And with other people, right? Obviously, right? Okay, so that's Ryan. Henok, he was at HBS. He joined Evercore, which is, you go to HBS, you go to the consulting houses, and then he joined Ryan at Shield AI. Ashish, he went to Qualcomm. Then he got recruited into Apple, and at Apple, he was in charge of the cost-saving program for the iPhone. Now, I want you to imagine what that is. That's like billions of dollars, right? At play, and probably, I think he has on his website or his LinkedIn, saved $300 billion. Very easy to do with the volumes we're talking about, right? Remember, this is the guy that came out of school and we said, what do you know about manufacturing? Nothing. Okay, you're in charge of manufacturing, right? So, and then I think he got bored with that, and then he's got a company called Vegan Snacks or something, which he'll ship you vegan snacks. So very consequential for all of them, right? And then they've gone, they've all gone off and do other interesting things. Now, lessons, okay. So cash flow is king, and this is the idea is you jump off, and you better learn to fly before you get down and hit the bottom, right? So the distance to the top, well, that's the money you raise, right? And the rate you're going down, that's your burn rate. It's kind of a pretty, but I like this graphic because it really gets across the materiality of it, if I can put it that way, right? So, okay. And there's a paper we wrote on these kind of ideas that might be interesting to you. Okay. Yeah, I think I already talked about a lot of this sort of stuff, but maybe just to, so we sort of developed this model, which I later ran in other startups, this super lean startup. The idea is you have, as it were, very, very low cash consumption. You shift on the capital side, and you basically hire out of these two extremes. You can't hire somebody in the middle because they need the cash, right? And so it's quite useful in IP or software-related companies. If you're going to build a chip or something that requires large capital costs, you can't do this, right? But something where the predominant cost is R&D, people, you can run something like this. And so that's the advantages. I should really talk about the disadvantages. Okay, disadvantages are this sort of works for like a period of 2 years or 3 years, and then people get tired of it, right? Location obviously matters, and then one of the downsides of the low capitalization is the ramp up is slow. Okay. Okay, so that's let me talk about economic development. This is a chart which shows the unicorns per state, and we pick unicorns because this is where explosive GDP growth is happening, right? And so you can check, like California has 404, New York, And then this is per capita, basically, right? So California is 10, and you can, as you can see, we in Florida are not even approaching 1. And you kind of know this, materially, right? Because the deep technology-driven things, it turns out they're around these ecosystems, right? California has 3 cities that have tight ecosystems that are generating growth. Boston has that, including Austin and so on, right? So I, over the years, I've been thinking a lot about why is this, right? I mean, we obviously have, we have money, we have market, we're a large state, we have a lot of, and I'm quite convinced that the issue is culture. So there's a sort of a culture, and I want to kind of explain that a little bit, because there's 3 levels of culture that matter. There's at the employee sort of / founder level, customers, and then somebody that's going to give you money, right? And and what I want you to sort of imagine is, what happens at the employee level is you're in Silicon Valley, you work for Google, and you say, I'm going to start this company, startup. What are your friends saying? What do your friends are saying, that sounds great. What are you doing? Maybe I'll join, right? Yeah, this Google thing, yeah, they're making too much money, right? This kind of thing. So there's this culture of risk-taking that's interesting. I would say the other place that I deal with a lot of these issues is a place like India. I used to have large R&D centers there, and literally there, what would happen is if you were working for Google, and you said I want to do a startup, your family would say, "Are you crazy? You got a good job, And your friends would have a similar point of view. So the cultural backdrop really would fight you. Right? I don't know if it's changed much, but I don't think it has. And I would say in Florida, it's sort of like this, good luck. Nobody's going to say, yeah, I'm there with you. They're more like, yeah, best wishes, right? Well, I'm not trying. This is not trying to be negative, positive. It's just an observation relative to the role of culture and this sort of thing. Same thing with customers. You're in Silicon Valley. There's a hot new startup, and everybody wants to be the part of the story of that startup. Yeah, I'll use your stuff. I can be part of the. I was the first one to use blah blah blah, right? Okay. I would say, like I said, in a place of, why should I use your stuff? You might be gone tomorrow. I'm not going to take that risk as a customer, right? And again, in Florida, let's evaluate you. I mean, where I live, we call it Ocala or Slocala, but I don't know. You have this kind of feeling of the velocity of movement. Is not very very fast, right? And then obviously on the risk capital side, there's lots of risk capital in Silicon Valley. There's very little other than imported from the U.S. In India. And in Florida, interestingly, we have lots of money. Money is not the issue. We're a very rich state, right? And if you wanted to build real estate, you wanted to build a medical clinic, you're not going to have trouble finding money, right? But if you want to do something high tech without a lot of risk, at least to my knowledge, traditional VC funds are relatively limited. We have angel groups, but they're relatively limited, right? And then maybe the coup de grace, as it were, is that our pension fund ships money out of the state so they can be invested in Silicon Valley, Boston, Austin. And that's sad for me. Anyway, all right. So those are the other people. So postmortem for me, interestingly enough, that transaction really didn't change my life very much. I just kept doing what I was doing. I work these days quite heavily in this research institute in areas of autonomous vehicles, autonomous in both, ground, airborne systems, and marine. So ground, largely kind of with some research institutions in Europe, airborne systems, and very little, and then marine with Woods Hole, which is a large research facility in Massachusetts, right? I continue to work with startups. So if you're, all of this is on the website, but I work with Tensor. So Tensor is an AI fabric company. They just got, they're like $1 billion valuation. So they're making chips that service AI, right? New, which is an EDA company, and then Scholarly, which is a education company. Actually, they just got an SBIR grant. So I kind of continue to do the same sort of things, working. Most of these are spin-outs of research that I've done. I think that's it. Yeah. All right, that's the story.
I love that you talked about all the X's because, oh goodness, all of us that work with entrepreneurs know how important it is that we counsel them to never badly burn bridges with anybody.
Yeah.
You know, always resolve issues some way because you just don't know.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
To your point, you're going to need to circle back.
Yes.
To that person, so. And I love that you were in GTech. Y'all don't know, but my first exposure to business incubation was that incubator. I was on the team that helped create GTech.
Oh, cool.
With Conciosa. It's City of Gainesville, so yeah, I credit that with getting me here. So, we probably have, I know we're running out of time, but some questions.
Any questions?
So, yes, Bob.
So I zeroed in on your last slide. One of your interests is humor.
Yeah.
And we haven't met before. But
Yeah.
You track your, hey, this is great. Oh my God, hey, this
Yeah.
is great. What was there ever a time in that path? What was the time in that path where you were that close to quitting?
Just one?
Yeah.
The most likely?
You're always, you're always in this sort of state of, and I'm going to put this in kind of funny terms, which is love, okay? You fall in love with the idea, you fall in love with the story, you fall in love, and at that point, you're euphoric. This is going to work. This is going to be great. Whoever you're dealing with is going to be okay. And then, as things don't work quite as you hope, which almost never they do, right? You sort of are in these periods of time of, maybe I'm just full of bullshit. Maybe I just don't know what I'm doing. And you sort of, and then what I find is a lot of success really just turns out to, you just, and by the way, I don't do it that much, but I used to run a lot, especially long distances. And for those of you that do that, I know somebody that is on a cast somewhere. Yeah. I mean, the key is you just put one step in front of the other. Things are maybe falling apart, money is not there, and I mean, the cash flow thing is the thing that drives you every day, right? I mean, you know exactly, okay, when is that bill gonna hit? You're sort of tracking that at such a minute level. For myself, as a sort of a coming in later, I ended up writing checks to WiPower that I didn't expect to write, right? So I came in, so you come in, okay, it's just gonna be isolated from the rest of my life. Okay, if it happens, it happens, but then you're like, okay, here's the choice, you shut it down, or do I throw another 50K in there, right? And you sort of, and then, you just sort of go through that story, right? So it's highly volatile, I would say, and people that do well are people that are sort of emotionally stable, can stay stable, it seems to me. And things take way longer than you think, right? You're sort of sitting there, the Mike Odell thing, when he responded in, 5 seconds, I'm like, I was euphoric, right? He's interested. He's interested, right? Okay, we send him the thing, the chart. 3 days later, I can't say on the day, did you look at it? Did you look at it? I mean, So 3 days later, yeah, I looked at it. I gave it to my team. They should be in touch with you. 3 weeks ago, nothing happens, right? So the whole process of timing and how you get people interested. I mean, you learn a lot. I didn't mention this. I had a job, which it turned out was the best training for what I did. It wasn't like my technical work at Carnegie Mellon or, you know, at Harvard. It was actually, I had a telesales job. So I trained air conditioners, right? So what they do, they used to do anyway, is they would hire people, and they had a by street directory, and you would call people on the street as a telesales person to arrange visits by the salespeople. Okay, so that was the deal. It's like a 95% rejection rate, right? I mean, it's just, you know. And then you have to, you know, even after you engage with them, you have to ask difficult questions like, you know, they found out if the husband and wife weren't both there, they couldn't close the deal, right? So you say, oh, is your wife going to be there? You know, like, well, I don't know, why do you need my, you know, you were getting that kind of conversation. Or you had to make sure they hadn't had a recent bankruptcy. Like, so you're all this delicate stuff, right? What turned out, getting used to that level of rejection, and as it were, still navigating your psyche through that is not bad training for fundraising. Yeah? It might be the first thing, you know, you do.
You know, Cecily, I think there's a whole boot camp series embodied in this presentation. Kelly, I think we just need to take it, break it up into snippets and run a boot camp here with that. So, well, it is 10:45, so what I'd like to suggest is that we wind this up and give y'all a chance to come talk to him individually and with each other. And thank you so much for being one of our UCF Innovate ambassadors and being here with us today. And for those of you that are not a UCF Innovate ambassador, would like to know what that's all about, I would be happy to talk to you. Come see me. Thank you.